Hello and welcome to the Christian Marriage Podcast, the only podcast on the entire internet about Christian marriage that I host. I'm Nick. I'm so glad you're here. And if you deal with the effects of trauma on your marriage, especially you're just getting married, you're just trying to figure out, how do I be united with this person when it is hard to trust another person because of the effects of trauma? You are going to find this episode very interesting. So let me introduce you to Joel and Cathy. They are from Knoxville, Tennessee. They've been married for 47 years. Something interesting about Cathy is that at her age, they got married around 18. They've been married for 47 years. I can't do math. You can do it. At her age, she said, I would still have young children, at least for an hour. I love that. And the other interesting thing about them and about Joel is that Joel did not propose to Cathy until 46 years into marriage. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we get into their story, but I had a great conversation with them, and especially if you have dealt with the effects of trauma, you are gonna really enjoy them. So here's one thing that really I want you to pay attention to. Pay attention to the effect that trauma had on Cathy and Joel's marriage. Cathy had to learn to let her guard down in marriage. There were at least two things that were helpful for her in getting her to do that. One was knowing God's love for her and his care for her. And that allowed her to drop her guard with at least one person, Jesus. Not even Joel, but Jesus. But learning to drop her guard with Jesus helped her to drop her guard with Joel, until eventually she was able to overcome a lot or maybe all of the effects of trauma in her life. The second thing that helped Joel and Cathy overcome the effects of trauma was Joel's commitment to compassion and his never give up attitude. Being the spouse of someone who has trauma in their past means that you have to be a safe place for that person through some incredible topsy-turvy storms. And it is going to feel pretty overwhelming. You can only do it when you yourself are anchored to Jesus, your rock. So here's a question that I want you to consider, and let me know in the comments. If you have suffered the effects of trauma in your marriage, what was some of the most encouraging and empowering parts of Cathy and Joel's story for you? And if you're on the other side of kind of really trying to figure out and coming out of trauma, what was helpful for you in your marriage to overcome some of that and so that your relationship could thrive? Let me know in the comments, and I would love to know what was helpful for you, and let's help each other overcome the effects of some really terrible, evil things that have happened to us. So this is Cathy and Joel, and I hope that you guys enjoy this episode. Joel and Cathy, I'm so glad that you are able to join me here on the Christian Marriage Podcast. I'm really excited to talk about kind of your origin story and what it was like, sort of coming from your individual backgrounds and having to come together. It's a story that everybody, whoever is ever married, has to deal with. We are two individuals coming from different contexts, and sometimes those contexts can be wildly different. Sometimes they can be actually really unhelpful, and we have to learn how to come together, how to make it work, how to become the people that can be married. So it's a story that I'm really excited to hear your version of what was helpful, how God met you in it, and to know the wisdom that you can offer to that question. So thank you for being my guest here on the Christian Marriage Podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for getting in touch with us. We're happy to do
We're
that.
excited to share.
Great. Okay, so where do we start? You wanted to start kind of before you even knew each other. So tell me about your story of meeting each other and what was that like?
Do you want to start? You want me to?
Why don't you start and then
Okay. Well, I grew up in a home that was atheist, violently atheist, meaning that even the name of God was not permitted. I was extremely abused sexually, physically, emotionally. And it was before my junior year
Of high school.
of high school. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm getting emotional.
No, that's totally fine. And it speaks to how these things never really stop affecting you. It never really stops going away. Something like that.
Right. So, I had a really good friend. The Lord always blessed me with one good friend wherever we were. It wasn't popular. I didn't get invited to parties and that kind of stuff. I was very awkward, but I had one good friend and we would walk all the time. And we saw that this house in the neighborhood, there were two boys that had moved into the neighborhood and we were like, we'd want to meet them. And so we walked and we walked and we walked and we never saw them. And so I ended
Were you
up
just circling the house? Or?
not quite the house, but the neighborhood. Yeah. And so my parents told me that we were moving to Ohio. And I was like, what? And so right before we moved, we visited a friend that we had known for years. And his wife had he and his wife had a lake house. And we went over there to have like a goodbye kind of party thing.
Yeah,
and
before moving.
And the gentleman, no, I won't even call him that, the man that owned the home and all, he sexually assaulted me while my dad watched. And so I was so broken. I was just such a broken person, then moved to Ohio where I knew nobody. I had this Southern accent. Nobody wanted to talk to me. It was just so, so difficult. But one summer, oh, go ahead.
So I had become friends with her best friend, Teresa, the one that used to walk around the neighborhood. She was one of my friend's girlfriend, and she was probably the only girl that I could talk to at school just because I didn't feel like I had to be anything except a friend. Because I was.
You had kind of said. Sorry, you had kind of said earlier that you kind of hadn't learned how to talk to girls yet.
No, I was scared of girls. That's why I would hide when they'd walk around the block. But anyway, so that set the stage. I met Teresa, and then you came to visit.
Yes, I came to visit my sister who had moved to Atlanta where he was. I was in Ohio. He was there. And 3 days before I had to go back to Ohio, my girlfriend asked Joel to come over and introduced us. And here comes in the door this long-haired guitar player, tall, I was just like, oh my. He was so handsome and just so easy to talk to. We stayed up all night, him playing the guitar. But again, I was leaving in 3 days, so I didn't really have a lot of time to get to know him. But we wrote each other letters every day. That's when letters were a thing, where you had to get a little envelope and a stamp and a piece of paper.
They didn't get it instantly or anything?
No. And then if you made a phone call, it was really expensive. So that was not a good route to go. So anyway, we wrote every day. We talked on the phone as much as we possibly could get away with without getting in trouble for the phone bill. And at that time, you had become a Christian through.
Well, I was raised in a Christian home, but actually through a friend of mine at school. We had a campus crusade at the school back then, and a couple of guys I hung out with, and that was where I really first realized what I had, what Jesus meant, and what other than just going to church and being a good person, which is what I had been doing since I was a kid, thinking, you know, and that's nothing wrong with that, except when you get down to the relationship, and that's where I was able to understand that. Let's put that.
Sure. Okay. So just let me summarize. So, Cathy, you come from this violently atheistic, really broken, really ugly home life where some really terrible things happened. Joel, you're coming from this Christian home, but it's not like, but you met and then you really owned a relationship with Christ, like kind of after you met. Is that what we're saying so far?
Yeah. And one thing, I did have a lot of insecurity because my mom was, she was manic depressive, how you say that, really from the time we were old enough to know. Wow. And the interesting thing was my dad, who was a World War II double Purple Heart veteran, took care of her, and I saw that's where I learned compassion was from a hardened World War II dad that had a wife that couldn't cope with life. And so I'm stepping into a marriage very insecure because of, that. And that's where God started us.
Yeah. And when I was in Ohio, my neighbor came over and asked me if I wanted to go to a youth haunted house at the Baptist church. And I was like, sure, I'll go. And I don't know how I got out of the house to go, but I did. And that Sunday, I got a ride with them, and my parents didn't know where I was going, but I went to their Baptist church and I ran to the altar. It was like, there's got to be more to life than this. There's got to be something. And so I gave my life to the Lord. He gave his life to the Lord before we actually knew each other.
Before you actually knew each other?
Yes. Yes. See,
okay.
I think you're going to have to edit this.
Yeah. Challenge accepted.
Okay.
There's no way.
Okay.
That was 48 years ago. We're still
should have
the timeline is okay. It's fine.
But we did meet each other, and both have had that experience of knowing the Lord, which really did bond us together. So I was looking for a way out of my situation, and so he gave me a really pretty star sapphire ring and wanted to ask me to be his girlfriend. And by the end of the evening, we were engaged. So that ring turned into more than what he had intended. But he was so compassionate and he was so kind. And I was young and long blonde hair and the first girl he'd ever dated. And So
okay, let me track with you. So you're saying, so you were met originally.
Yes.
And you had like 3 days to sort of be together and get to know each other.
Right.
And then you kind of went your separate ways for a while and did the letters and did the phone.
Right.
And then, but we're able to like get together at one point. At which point?
Yeah, a couple of visits.
About 3.
A couple of visits.
We had about 3 visits before we got married.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got my Volkswagen Beetle 13 hours from Atlanta to Cleveland, outside of Cleveland, Ohio, to see her. So
yeah,
whenever
perfect.
I could, I would.
And you told me part of this story before, so I just want to, you, Joel, came with this really nice ring that you just wanted to give her, and kind of one thing led to another, and maybe there was some miscommunication or something like that. And Cathy, you thought that you were saying yes to a proposal that Joel hadn't actually meant to propose. Is that what happened?
Well, I kind of twisted the story around because he gave it to me and he said, I really care about you. And I think he even said love. I love you. And I said, would you want to be together forever? And he was like, oh, yeah, yeah. And so then I took that as meaning, you want to marry me. So then we start, and I said, would you want to get, we could get married. And
she said, we could get married on your birthday.
Yeah, I did say that.
And we did.
And we did. And now that we're parents, we understand why our parents were like, what? But anyway, within a year, we were married.
Yeah, within a year from that first meeting.
Yeah.
Wow,
so,
yeah.
We were.
And I was 19 and she was 18.
Okay, 1918.
Well,
wow.
I should say it was my 19th birthday.
Yeah.
That we got married on.
That you got married on.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
that's amazing.
Barely 19.
Yeah.
And Cathy, you said something that whenever we had talked before, that you were sort of so looking forward to just getting out of the house, because obviously there was a lot of stuff going on there that you just had. It's like you had to get away, and so here comes Joel, and you just kind of, you had to get away. So like, of course, if somebody wants to take me out of this, I will gladly go with him. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, or it could have been the opposite. Like, I just wanted him to want me that bad. He was the first guy that ever said I was pretty. He was the first person that had ever said they loved me in my whole life. I'd never been told I was loved. I never was told I was pretty. And he kept telling me that. And I just, wasn't, he never actually said the words, will you marry me? It was just kind of an assumed thing that I took on. And, but there again, we see God's hand in it. I needed to be, taken care of. I needed somebody that was going to help me get out of that situation. And he was, I believe, even though the story's crazy, I believe that God's hand was right there. He knew that Joel was the type of person that could take a wounded person and actually be able to have a relationship, because wounded people are not easy to get along with a lot of times. And in our early marriage, when we would be intimate together, I just cried because I'd had so much abuse from before that the emotions that came up were just more than I could handle. And I would just lay there and cry. And he'd be like, what did I do? And it's like, you didn't do anything. But I'd never really shared with him anything about what I grew up with until years later. So he had no idea what. And then we had been married for 3 months and I was pregnant with our first child.
Wow.
Yeah. So I, being a person that absolutely adores babies, I just, from the very beginning, I just feel like that's something God put in me. That's who I am. And I babysat for everybody's kids, and I didn't have a good example of watching a mother. So I believe God just put that in me of how to nurture a child. And so I was ecstatic that I was pregnant. Neither of us had insurance. I had a part-time job at a daycare, and he had another job.
I was driving a truck.
I was driving the truck.
Yeah, you're 18 and 19 at this point, right?
I know. So we had no insurance, and every single time something would happen to where we would get out of the hospital with that baby before the the accounting department opened up to tell us, you owe us this much, for that child. And it was like, we don't have any money, but what are you going to do? Take the baby back? So, like I said before, we didn't do things in a normal way, like get a job, get a home, then think about kids. It just was like,
just happening.
It was just happening. And of course, we loved our kids.
One thing too, I just want to say right here that she broke the mold, that she had grown. She was the best mom. And I don't know how that happens. Coming from where she came from, she didn't continue that. She became a absolutely wonderful. And I just think that speaks so much to God's grace.
It was really, really the Lord, because I didn't emulate what I grew up with. We made a vow that we may not have a lot of stuff, but our kids will never go to bed any night without them knowing how much we love.
Wow.
And our lives were about them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And which I appreciate you saying that, because a lot of people do, right? I mean, all of the trends, any of the research that they do about trauma and early trauma, I mean, it affects people so deeply that there's a ton of different ways that people end up kind of doing and hurting, hurt people, right?
Right.
And but so what an incredible thing to be able to say that, Joel, you're saying she didn't carry it on, and what an amazing redemption that God was able to work. How, I mean, I think of the passage about I pour wrath out on 3 or 4 generations, but I bless thousands of generations.
Yes.
And something about that where it's like God just kind of like this stops here, and just poured out his kindness on you, Cathy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And we raised our kids to know that God loved them and that he would provide for us. And we would sit with our kids around the kitchen table. We didn't have food, and we'd pray. We'd ask God to bring us dinner that night. And every single time, there was never a time when my kids did not have food. Either somebody would bring food over, somebody would say they need a babysitter. Can you babysit? And they'd pay me way more than what they normally would. And
that's amazing.
God just provided. So my kids grew up knowing our help comes from the Lord. It doesn't come from a job. It comes from the Lord. Although a job, obviously Joel was a wonderful provider with what, he had to work with. And, so, but
that's amazing.
My kids know, it's just, they'll tell you, our kids now that are in their late 40s, they'll tell you, oh yeah, I remember, us not having anything, but mom made it special. Mom and dad made it special. We did.
Yeah.
He would get his guitar out and we'd teach him songs. He taught them memory verse songs.
Yeah.
And they could sing the word of God through these songs. And
what you're saying is we didn't have, sounds like country song maybe, but it's like we didn't have much, but we had the love of God that we could pour out. We couldn't pour out money, we couldn't pour out things, but we could pour out the love of God and the blessings of God onto our children. And that you're saying that ended up being this really sweet thing to be able to do. Yeah. That's amazing. So, okay. So there you are, 18 and 19, young Christians coming from, various levels of a broken home. Cathy, you came from a very broken home, and married, kind of, I don't know if you'd say accidentally married or unbeknownst to Joel getting married.
Once we went down the aisle, he understood what was happening.
He got the point.
He was like,
And
"Oh,
I was fully in agreement.
that's why I'm wearing this white tux."
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, back whenever you had hair.
Yeah.
But you're young. You have nothing. Baby on the way, coming from two different backgrounds. So, what was the hardest part for you as a couple? Trying to come together, to do life, to being married, to figure out how to help each other, coming from that kind of brokenness. What was the hardest part of those early years of trying to be unified?
I think for me, it was, who is this guy? I mean, we didn't know each other. It's not that we didn't enjoy being together, but we didn't know each other. And so it was really getting to know who this person was it was a challenge. It was, and we were both very young. We didn't have a lot of experience in much of anything.
Real quick, looking back on it, what was so hard about getting to know the person that you were excited to marry and that we're currently living with? Like, I get that it's hard, but looking back on it, what made it hard to just like get to know each other?
I think for me, it was hard because I was so guarded in my life. I was very guarded on who I hung out with, I never had a group of friends. I never really had those connections. So to have someone that I saw every single day and had conversations with her, I was so out of my comfort zone because I was such an introvert, and getting to know who he was. And, at first you've got the butterflies because,
That's new.
It's new and you're young and you're having sex and it's okay because you're married and it's supposed to be and those kind of things. But then it's like, but who are you? And why do you leave your toothpaste out? And why do you do these things? And there was these little things that, because you can't really get to know somebody after 3 times of seeing them.
Right.
I know they do that in other countries.
Well, sorry, let me, one thing. You mentioned, Cathy, that you're just guarded. And that's something that I hear a lot from people who are coming out of, abusive or traumatic situations where there's, we all crave security. Yeah. And what you're saying is, I didn't have security growing up. Mm-hmm. Certainly not as a teenage young woman. So I learned that I needed to guard myself. Right. And you came into marriage with a certain guardedness.
Exactly.
Because you needed to feel safe, and that's how you knew that was the best way that you knew to feel safe, but that's going to affect your ability to open up, to connect with your spouse. And it makes sense. It's just...
Yeah. And for me, inside, to be vulnerable with a man and to be intimate with a man was so, in my head, I was so screwed up in that area. Like,
wow.
How can I give myself to somebody intimately and not be afraid? Wow. Not be like, because I'd been through so much abuse.
For sure.
So there was that.
There was this fear of
that guarded.
You're used to being hurt by men in really hurtful and really intimate ways. And so it kind of, you're saying it just really like threw you for a loop trying to make love in the way that you're actually supposed to.
Right.
But it really, you're saying it messed with you.
Right. Yeah. And I kept waiting for the ball to drop, waiting to get hurt. Like, it's always hurt before. Even things that were presented to me as good things were not. They were hurtful things growing up. So
Yeah.
my ability to understand that he wasn't going to hurt me, it was hard because I kept waiting for something to happen. In fact, I remember a point where he would tell me he loved me so much that it made me angry.
What?
I didn't know how to take that. It was like, why do you keep telling me that you love me? This, once is enough. And it was just, I was not used to that at all. So, and he was a very affectionate type person. And so again, getting to know each other, getting to know that that's his love language, to hold my hand, to put his arm around me, to snuggle me. And so it was really hard for me to embrace that and get in my head that this is a good thing.
Yeah, it's hard to accept. And yeah, I think that makes sense, right? I know a lot of people that if they're in that struggle, it feels awful. I mean, I bet you can, like, it feels really confusing. It feels really, what's going on here? Shouldn't I like this?
Right.
And so I think it's really helpful just to say, one, that, yeah, it was really confusing and it was really hard to trust. And you eventually, somehow or another, got to the place where you came to trust him more and more over the years. And it's possible, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
It's possible with the Lord.
yeah, for sure.
I think it's hard on your own. I don't know how you would navigate that, but
For sure. Joel, I cut you off. I wanted to
No,
give you a chance.
that's okay. I think one of the things too that we realize is we went from being kids to being a couple. We never really got to know ourselves as young adults, and
Wow, yeah.
this is something that we've just recently been realizing. That we didn't have that time, that we didn't develop really our own interests. It was always us as a couple, and realizing that that's something that's important. I think that we've seen in our kids that they had their lives before they got married, and they still do things with their friends separately sometimes. And I think that's so cool that they have that. But we didn't have that. I think I told you maybe when we talked that, and I'm getting a little ahead, but we moved a total of like over 30 times since we've been married. So we didn't have a lot of opportunity to really to make friendships. Although the ones that we did make, we still have 40 years later. So,
yeah.
But the other side of her not, the hard part of us not being able to relate, I didn't understand why she felt those ways. I didn't know about the abuse, like she said, until years later. So, I don't know how you navigate that at a young age.
What was that like for you? Like she was having these feelings, just breaking down during sex. I mean, that kind of stuff sounds like it would be really confusing for you. She's guarded. What was that like for you?
I didn't know what was going on. I because I grew up in a situation where I saw instability, for lack of a better word, in my mom. I felt like that was something that I could, be compassionate about, even if I didn't understand it. But I'm also was too much of a people pleaser. That was kind of one of the things that I was. So I would always agree with her, no matter what the situation was. I still struggle with that, honestly. That's something that I have been working through my whole life because of insecurity. But the fact of if we could have turned the clock back and go back, and we could have gone and each of us had counseling, at that age, with today's counseling techniques and it could have been a different situation, getting to know each other. But
you feel like it could have been helpful.
Yeah, but
could have like shortened the gap between just being so different and being so not knowing each other. Could have like helped you come together.
Yeah,
faster.
I think if people had the offer of premarital counseling, I think that's a great thing. We may have had that with one of the pastors at the church, but it was
obviously very memorable.
It was probably the night before we got married.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is very interesting. What a powerful. I'm
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Cathy.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say, though, that it just shows if you trust in the Lord. And that was one thing that Joel and I didn't have. We didn't really know each other, but we knew God. We knew the Lord. We knew that was so solid for both of us that I think that's why we were able to press through all the hard times. And still, after 47 years, with tons of other experiences. But even with that beginning, we were still able to hang together because when it all came down to it, it was, what would God want us to do?
Okay, yeah, let's talk more about that. So so you're saying that one thing that was really helpful that kind of tied us together, even if it felt like kind of nothing else was at times,
right?
Was we both knew God,
right.
And we both had this sense of what would God want from me in this scenario that I've never been in before, and we're trying to navigate together. So my question is like, what about God? What about knowing God was actually like tangibly helpful in navigating some of this? Why was it helpful?
I think for me, it gave me strength not to give up. It gave me, I felt like for our marriage, which was hard at times because, well, we hadn't said this yet, but after our first baby was 3 months old, we got pregnant again. So we had 2 in diapers, 2 in cribs, and 2, it was life. We had a lot going on. That drawing strength, drawing hope from God. If we hadn't had that, I really don't think we would still be together. Well,
because one thing, right. One thing you're assuming or inherent in what you're saying is we kind of got to some places where we sort of, or Cathy, you're saying I at times was tempted to give up. But knowing, and well, how did it strengthen you? How did knowing God strengthen you away from this, just temptation to give up?
I think that because I knew the Word of God and I knew that marriage was, in the Lord's eyes, it's a commitment forever. I mean, it's a real, it's not just a flippant thing. And I knew that. And I also knew that if I sat before the Lord and said, I want to leave, I can't do this anymore. The Lord would give me strength. He'd give me hope. He'd give me something that's intangible that would give me the push to don't give up. Don't give up. Stay with it. I mean, there was a time where we separated, like after we were married 3 years, and and we had to walk that story, and it was awful. And I moved out and took the kids, and it was just, but I knew when I sat down and thought God would want us to be together. He'd want us to do whatever we could to work this out. And that's just how I feel about it. That's just how, because it would be easy to walk away.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying you knew that God teaches, somehow, like even as a young Christian, you knew that marriage was something that God took very seriously, and he said that you don't give up on this. And I love the picture of you sort of wrestling with that. And, you're saying, at times, maybe I would even go to God and say, I can't do this. I just need to get out. But you're sitting there in front of God, like praying to God. I love that image. Like I have to leave. I have to be done. And God strengthening you, I don't know, in ways that you didn't even think that maybe he could, or that you had in you, or whatever that is. But even just the process of you taking your feelings and taking that instinct to give up, and you being at the end of your rope, you taking that to God feels like an instructive, a moment of instruction, right? Where I see so many people who kind of have that instinct to give up, and they just wrestle with it themselves instead of entering God's throne room and
just
kind of
being honest. I think that's one thing, because I had nothing else when I became a Christian. I didn't have the teaching that a lot of people grow up with. I didn't know anything, but I knew the Word of God. I had it memorized. I had posters all over my room. I really, excuse my language, but I pissed off my parents so much because I just went, I taught Awanas. I just, because it filled me up. It gave me so much there was such a void there, and God filled that void. So I was very honest. I knew how to be really honest with God and not say the things I know I'm supposed to say, but to really say, I can't do this, God. I can't, unless you do something. I can't make this work. And just like with the food and praying that God give us our daily bread, it's the same thing. When we cry out to God, he does hear us and he answers those prayers. And there's nothing that we go through that he can't take care of, that he can't give us hope to get through. And again, like I said, we have so many experiences like that where, if we didn't have that faith in God, if we didn't have that hope in God, we would not be where we are now. But we did, and he always gave it. And it was not necessarily something that he threw in our face. It was like the Holy Spirit in us just saying, I got you. I got you. It's going to be okay. Wow. I got you. We are going to, and every time we press through, and I'm not just talking about me, but both of us together, Joel on his own too, when we did press through, when we did cry out to God and was honest and real, and he answered that, we became stronger as a couple. Our couple, our relationship became stronger and better. It was always better. It was like, oh, that was so hard to go through. But look, now I feel this much closer to you. I feel like,
for sure,
I've opened up some.
Yeah. You actually, well, to kind of go back to that, there was this barrier. You working through trusting God with something that was hard actually in the end, actually helped you open up to Joel, I think is some of what you're saying. Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely.
Joel, let me come back over to you. So let me go kind of all the way back to, you guys are just figuring this out, and you're coming from different places. What was helpful for you about decisions that you made, or anything? Like, how did you make it through those early years, and what was helpful for you?
I think really I drew a lot of strength from what my dad had what I had seen him go through with my mom when we would have hard times. I think the message was don't give up. But I also
You saw that message from your dad.
Yeah, he never gave up. So many times I don't know how he did it, but he would not give up. And I remember him telling me one time that anytime you find yourself in a situation where you need help, go help somebody. And I think one of the things that that helped me was just the faith of knowing that God was not going to give up on us. We didn't have the answers. I didn't have the answer, but there were promises that he had given me, and I believed that those were true. I didn't understand it. And I know that the Holy Spirit prays for us when we don't know how to pray. We get to those situations where we don't even know how to talk. We don't know how to pray. We don't know what to say. We don't know what we need. But there's the Holy Spirit, pleading for us. And that's so amazing to me. I think there was a lot of times, I didn't know the answer. I didn't know what to do, but God, he never gave up. And I'm sure that some of my reactions to things was probably fear. I didn't want it to end. I was prideful in the fact that, I don't want to be divorced. Those things fed into that, and I know they did. But the truth of and Cathy made a good point about honesty, and God already knows our hearts. And if you look at some of the songs, at some of the things that David prayed, oh my gosh, I mean, he was a mess. He was a total mess, but yet he went to God like that, and God accepted, and he listened. So I think that's something that again, it's hard for me to say I did this. It's more like God just never gave up.
Yeah, wow, I love that. The picture I get is like, sometimes the only anchor that you had together is, well, God doesn't give up on us. So I can't give up on my spouse.
Right.
And I totally get that. Part of my and Sandy's stories that we had at the beginning of our marriage was pretty rough for, like 3 or 4 years, something like that. And there were times when it felt like the only thing that was tying us together was, well, I made promises to her, and God made promises to me, and he's faithful. And I think that's kind of the general gist of kind of what you're saying. Like, God doesn't give up on us. And so if I'm trying to be like God, I can't give up on her or him, as long as it's kind of what you're saying.
I think too, it becomes not just an endurance, like, okay, I'm going to stay in this marriage because God says we have to stay married. If we honor him by staying married, he abundantly blesses us. He opens up, I have so many wonderful things for you. So it's not just this endurance of my will, I'm going to stay married because that's what God said I had to do. It's, I'm going to stay married because I know if I do, I receive the blessings of the Lord in my marriage, and it can be fun and it can be good. And it doesn't have to be I'm just walking around with this pebble in my shoe every day because I have to.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool.
that I've seen that over and over again, that when I think it has something to do with when and that's it. Well, I'll just speak for myself, but whenever I sort of it felt like the time that my and Sandy's marriage sort of started to turn a corner was when I had basically completely given up, like, getting what I wanted out of the marriage, and me saying, "Okay, God, you are calling me to love her like Christ." And so I guess that's still within my power to do, even if she's not being what I think she ought to be. But me making that decision, like, opened me up to actually loving her, and in the end empowered her to actually love me. And that's, it feels like along the lines of what you're saying. Like,
Absolutely.
God redeems. He brings life out of death. He brings, intimacy out of division, because that's who he is. Wow. Yeah. I think that's so powerful. Okay, so amazingly, we'll have to wrap up. But I love this story of just two people who are really different, coming from really different backgrounds, just trying to figure out, what do we do? We don't even know ourselves, to Joel's point. We don't even know ourselves. We're just trying to get out of this terrible situation that we've been in. But now we're thrown into together, and it's like, what is going on? It's confusing. It's emotional. It's hard. You kind of want to give up sometimes, or a lot. But you know that God is faithful, and he calls us to be faithful. So let me just ask you one more question. So there are a lot of people out there early in their marriage who are finding that it is work. It is hard to choose to be married and stay married to a spouse that feels really, that they're just kind of confused by. What is, like, your one, if you could give them one piece of advice or one truth that to encourage them, what would that one thought be for that person?
I think for me, I would share with someone, and I've shared this with my kids. Marriage is hard. There's no doubt that it's difficult, but it's also the most awesome experience you'll have. It's the closest person in this world that you'll have. It's a relationship that goes beyond a friendship. It's somebody that's got your back. It's all these wonderful things, but you've got to accept the fact that it's not necessarily going to be easy. But when it's hard, that doesn't mean it's over. That doesn't mean that it's not good. Hard does not equal bad. Hard is just hard, and that's life. It's hard to have kids, but wow, can you imagine your life without your boys? Right? You have two boys.
Yeah, right. Two boys. Yep.
Yeah, the blessings that you get from that are so incredible, but it's hard work. And same with marriage. If you'll acknowledge from the beginning that we're going to hit some rough times, let's not go into this with some idealistic thing that, I'm going to have dinner ready every night and you're going to be at work and you're going to come up. I mean, honestly, that's how I thought it was supposed to be, because all I saw of marriage, that any kind of functional marriage, was on TV. It's not like that. But it can also be just a wonderful, wonderful relationship. But it's
but it's on the other side of trial. You have to walk through trials to get to the blessings.
And the blessings,
I love that.
The blessings really do outweigh the trials if you'll give it time.
There you go. Love it.
If you'll give it time.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So, that's probably
what about you, Joel?
I love one of the things that Cathy used to say, when she cleans, she deep, deep, deep cleans. So if she's going to clean out a closet, she makes a huge mess. Once that closet and that mess is gone, that closet is immaculate. It's beautiful. And that's what I've tried to learn with us is we have to make a mess sometimes and we have to put it all out. We have to be honest. We have to share the crap. We have to pull it all out. And then once we dig through all that mess, what we end up with is something beautiful. And I think that's what God does with us, you know? I mean, he's constantly taking the crap out and putting more of himself in. So,
that's beautiful. Yeah. I love that. I love that metaphor. Wow. And part of what I like about it is there's an admission that I need to be like actively cleaning out my closet. Let's not pretend that there's nothing there that couldn't be better.
Right.
I need to do it, but also God is doing it for me / with me / in me, however that works.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And one thing I want to add is you're never, and I can say this because I am 66 years old, you're never too old to keep getting better. You're never too old to stop trying. And I think it's really important as people get older is not to just settle with where you're at.
Yeah.
Because
we
can always be better.
Paul writes about finishing the race and, some of that kind of stuff. Like, we're always going to be in process and there's always more to grow, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's very encouraging. Thank you for that, guys. This has been a lot of fun. I can't believe that the time has gone by so fast. I love hearing how, you know what, we sat there and had nothing, but we had God, and He provided food. Sometimes He provided just enough strength to bind us together that we didn't even, when we kind of did, maybe we didn't even want that strength in that moment, but He is faithful, He is good. And I guess what I take away is pursuing Him and seeking to be faithful to Him. It does have the power to unlock this wealth of blessing.
Yes.
That we can't even imagine on this side of choosing to trust Him. So I love that. Thank you so much, and thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you.